I will talk about forced labor in Banat, not only compulsory, it was just one of the forms. After the destruction of Yugoslavia in 1941, in order to avoid the conflict between the allies, Hungary and Romania, it became part of the occupied Serbia. The government was given to local Volksdeutsche, who had the autonomous status in relation to the Serbian collaborationist government. Okay. They enacted government on behalf of the German occupying forces and their own interest. This will give its own stamp to the various forms of forced labor in this province. The first strike during the April War and after that was focused on the Jews. They were focused in cities and larger towns. The Jewish population from the first days of the occupation was submitted to denigration by the Germans, and they were sent to forced labor. This discriminatory practice was made lawful through the military commander of Serbia defining the position of the Jews and the Roma. And since in Serbia the Jews and Roma were sent to clear the rubble in Banat during the April War, there was no such destruction, there was no need to have such work. So the jobs that the Jews were doing were smaller and physically easier to do. But due to the anti-Semitic sentiment of the good deal of the population, they performed the jobs under especially humiliating conditions. So in Pančevo, the rabbi was arrested and was made to sing Hebrew songs while washing the cars. The intellectuals also in Pančevo were made to clear the toilets with their bare hands, to wash windows, and to clean using their clothes and even beards. They made them transport wood for Germans, and they also were made to cut wood with blunt instruments. Banat Jews were not long exposed to these actions because they moved on to the next phase of their suffering. They were taken and deported to Belgrade, where they were soon to be shot. They were used for dirty work like removing corpses and for physical work, not only in Banat, where the heavy labor, which was inherited as a civic duty from the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, but in the occupation was implemented with national discrimination. The main form of forced labor was the so-called compulsory work in Banat. It had its specificities compared to the rest of Serbia, just like the occupational regime had its specificities. In its main characteristics, it fit into the general pattern of forced labor in Serbia, and it was linked to it. The forced laborers from Banat was sent to Serbia and vice versa. It was logical because the occupational government, in spite of the specificities, was part of the German occupying force in Serbia, which directly was administered from Belgrade. The census was instituted earlier than in Serbia. It was ordered by Sela, the head of the Banat district, in 1941. At the time when in Belgrade, it was yet to consider the introduction of the forced labor. They included population between 18 and 45. They worked on roads, bridges, canals, irrigation, and so on. This service could last up to 6 months. In this way, the Volksdeutsche were the first to implement the policy that was getting ready to be implemented in the entire Serbia. It more looked like tasks for hard labor than was the forced labor in the rest of Serbia. Forced labor in Banat happened in Serbia, happened in Banat at the same time as in Serbia in the spring of 1942. In Serbia, they had to provide workers for the mines, but also construction works, while in Banat there were no mines. it was expected to export agricultural produce, so workforce was needed for agriculture. They would replace the Volksdeutsche who were recruited in the army. The Volksdeutsche households could get as many workers as they gave soldiers. Since the agricultural production had high priority, the forced laborers could, could also be claimed by German households. However, they could only get one worker regardless of the number of the absent household members. In addition to agriculture, they were used also to repair and build roads, dig out canals, and some were sent for work in Serbia. The workers were entitled to a daily fee, and during the war there were over 40 regulations issued on compulsory work, and in the essence of these acts was the regulation on the forced labor from 1941. Based on it, the Banat administrator issued an order for the mobilization of certain workers to do compulsory work and to use mobilized workers in order to make up for the workers absent due to the war. In Banat, as the support to compulsory work, they formed the National Service, which I will discuss later if we have the time. The major part of the workforce was first sent to work in agriculture. The work was regulated by the order of the 10th of May 1941. There was no option of paid replacement. They worked in groups for 45 to 60 days, and it was calculated as the work in the National Service for the renewal of Serbia. They provided daily fees, and in the case of violation of the order, there were fines or other sanctions. They were used by various administrators, and they made contracts with the workers. The punishment, the sanctions were threatened also to their landlords. In Banat, it was formally restricted, but it could have been extended from 45 to 60 to 130 days and to as many as 210 days in 1944. In practice, the number of weeks differed from municipality. From municipality, the worker could not leave the workplace until the replacement came, which often happened with a delay, just as it happened in Serbia. German families in which the compulsory workers were working had to take care of them, and also they had to feed them, to wash their clothes, to ensure their accommodation, and pay treatment up to 200 dinas. Since May 1943, the costs were covered by the local authorities. The non-compliance for the landlords would lead to taking away the workers from them. Some of them were not satisfied with the workers, which was one of the reasons for their mass escapes. There were also various corporal punishments introduced for such acts. 13,500 non-Germans were working, and the local administrator issued an order of ordering for compulsory work of all men and women up to the age of 60. So the age limit was broadened. It was who were not used on their farms or companies, they were to be employed. Otherwise, this order replaced the standard labor agreement, and the daily fee should be standard, or as in their place of work. The workforce should be received by vital industries. So many alcoholics, Roma, other asocial people were to be organized in brigades, working brigades. They took mainly young people from 17 to 25, and they could also liberate officials and those who were single parents. There were various rules to compensate for the clothes used or the food used. The fines for non-compliance were financial fines or forced labor for up to 30 days. As in Serbia, there were many voluntary escapes, and this was not energetically pursued. In order to stop with this practice, the General Lab introduced various stricter fines, but however, in May 1944, several hundreds didn't come up for forced labor. Although these measures were introduced on the 20th of March 1943 in Banat, this was done only in 43. The first rule was concerned the Germans and Volksdeutsche, and introduced the obligation for Germans, both men and women. The exception was to people employed in agriculture, civil servants, students, and those who were incapable of working. The students and mothers of preschool children or mothers of 2 children below the age of 14. LAP prescribed that only the administrators and various administrative officials and German municipal presidents could enforce the working obligation for Volksdeutsche. So they wanted to stress their independence from the other population in the Banat region. So it showed that they were not an exception from compulsory labor. To show that their status implied also obligations. As for Hungarians, they were also obliged to compulsory work. Their administrator had made an agreement with the German authorities that they should no longer be forwarded to compulsory labor, but it was not observed. There was a working obligation for the German youth, 6 months. Many of them helped with the field works in that summer, and the girls were in greater demand than the young men. It then became obligatory, but most of them failed to comply because their fathers were in military service, and there was no one to work on their own fields. They held propagandist lectures in the preparatory camps, and after the introduction of the war economy measures, they recruited 3 age groups. This was somehow similar to the Serbian service for renewal. With the work on the fields and the canals and the construction works, they had to provide force for the airports which the Luftwaffe wanted to build in the Banat region. They planned to expand the airports in Pančevo and Kovin. They needed 4,000 qualified and non-qualified workers. They sent 1,200 and 250 professional workers. They included an obligation in several of the Banat towns. Local governments should send the appropriate number of workers and replace them after 3 or 6 months, if possible, from non-agricultural population, since agriculture was the principal sector there. They also sent Volksdeutsche to this compulsory labor. They could not be dismissed before the adequate replacement arrived. Mostly German companies performed these works, especially works around board. They worked 10 to 12 hours a day with a salary of 20 to 50 dinars. The daily fee went to 150 dinars, but at the time where the daily fees amounted to 400 to 500 dinars, there were many complaints of even these small daily fees not being paid. The main construction work was the airport in Ečka. According to the estimates of the State Commission, 20,000 compulsory workers went through these works. There were several thousand Italian internees. Very few women worked, mainly as cooks and cleaning women. In Banat, however, women carried out even the heaviest construction works. Some of them were sent as punishment, as compulsory workers, as the clear consequence of the lack of the workforce. They were sent to work also in other airfields. However, they did not work in construction works, but as cleaners. They were really submitted to verbal and also physical abuse. They slept in their own homes and they worked less than the workers taken from the other places. They were placed in various sheds and the hygienic conditions were very poor, so many contracted lice due to lack of hygiene. Many fell ill. And due to all this, already in September 1943, many of them did not report to work, so the county commanders asked for stricter measures to be implemented. Although this system had its parallel in Serbia, there were differences in Serbia. The main form of compulsory work was sending to work to mines or to construction sites. They worked in large groups for German companies, and workers were placed in camps in Banat due to the characteristics of the economy. They were mainly sent to work in fields, and they could get not more than several workers working construction was for Luftwaffe and Wehrmacht. There was also the main difference. The majority workers replaced the absent Volksdeutsche workforce, whereas in Serbia they filled the places that could not be filled by free contracting in the market. So the work in Banat fields, even in bad landlords, was better, more tolerable than in Serbia. They worked in tasks that they were used to at home and that could never be so difficult as the works under armed guard. We should suppose that the accommodation, food, and the other living conditions were better than in camps in Serbia. This issue, however, requires further investigation. The fact is that with the application of machinery and manure, the scope of the agricultural production was able to be increased since the 18% of the population was called to arms. This was not the only form of compulsory work in Banat. They worked also in transport, in hard work, in unloading and loading, in bridge construction, or to unload grains, for example, in the Pančevo mill. They also applied forced labor for those who were the political opponents near the Danube. In Dubovac, a camp was made for workers working on cutting woods. They were black marketers, then political prisoners of the concentration camp in Bečgrad, and the so-called Bosnians, who were so called because most of them originated from Bosnia. Their camp was created on the 20th of August 1942. Due to exhaustion and brutal treatment of Volksdeutsche guards, so only 200 survived. This camp was abolished in November 1943, and 89 survivors were taken back to Sajmište. Political prisoners worked under equally difficult conditions. The part of the prisoners served their sentence in Serbia, mostly in the Bor mine. Also, the prisoners were taken to work in Banat. In Banat, the prisoners were mostly working in agriculture and in gardening. This was the case in Šulfovo property in Čoka and the former leather farm in Petrograd. They worked in gardens, in cutting wood, and sometimes in factories where they were rented as cheap labor. They were also taken to work to unload and load goods. They also worked in textile plants. There were main groups and subgroups as in Serbia, but they had local characteristics. The main form was compulsory work in agriculture, which was the economic need of the occupying force. The other form, building airfields, was the need of the occupying force, and it was part of the repressive system. It was integrated in the system of terror on the level of Serbia and the whole of Europe. So many people were affected by forced labor, but we should further investigate this issue.